Good morning, Bitcoiners. Good morning. Cloudy, snowy, crazy outside, but sun is totally up. No worries. We can definitely see it through all of this cloud and snow. Of course, Bitcoin is running. Literally nothing else to do except talk about what's new. Delicious. So, did you guys see this Netflix thing? So, Netflix has tried to put a new business model out, not just the subscriptions. They've tried to go with an advertising model, a little bit like Hulu. And they actually tied this new release of the advertising model to the Harry and Meghan Netflix series, which tries to make this case that Harry and Meghan are the victims somehow of abusive press or abusive media or whatever is going on. There's a scene where they contrast how Harry was forced to live in some of the royal homes in England. And I got to tell you, some of the royal homes and the one they gave him didn't look great, a little sketchy. So now he lives much better in California. So luckily, the show made the case. But it turns out that everyone hates the show. So it has terrible ratings with critics, 0 ratings, basically. I think 11 from fans. Now it might be getting ratings ratings bombed or whatever they call it. When people really hate something, they crowd in and troll the ratings and change it. But it might not be just ratings bomb. So the typical tactic of companies in this, Disney does it, and a few of the other large Hollywood studios do it, where they actually fan bait, where they do things that will create a reaction from the fans, and then they get to use that as a shield for criticism of the show. Oh, it's because they were white supremacists. That's why they hate the show. It's not because it's badly written, right? That we saw that on, we saw that for the Lord of the Rings series, for example, and Star Wars used the same trick. But this time there's a bit of a difference because they tied this show to the new business model. There's actually proof that people hate it. It's not just the troll bomb. So they are actually having to give back the money that they took from advertisers for delivery through the Harry and Meghan documentary. So, I mean, I have not seen it. I've only heard that the people who want to love it, and the people who want to hate it, and it's food for everyone, except more people hate it than like it in this case because the ratings are so bad, even from critics, even from these other folks. So in the end, no one's watching it, and they have to give the money back. They have to give the money back. I wonder if the same thing might end up happening in Canada. Now, we cover on this show the idea that most of Canadian media is actually subsidized by the federal government. It has been for quite a while. The reason is Canadian media can't survive privately really on its own because American private broadcasts will always overwhelm the Canadian ones. So there is embedded within the Canadian mind that they must subsidize their culture in order to even have one in the first place, right? That's sort of largely held amongst Canadians. So when all this internet stuff started, of course, like every other media like any other media ecosystem in a country, it was heavily influenced by what was going on the internet. So newspapers, other print magazines all suffered big time. And what they did in Canada was they just injected public funds, taxpayer money, to keep them all alive. The newspapers. So everything is held in kind of a time capsule there. No one reads the stuff. It's just complete garbage. Yesterday, they tried to run all these stories in lieu of the Twitter files and what's going on Twitter with journalists. And they had Aaron Rupar on, when he was cut off Twitter yesterday. So he was giving an interview to the public broadcaster in Canada, CBC. And they talked about how relentless the hatred is on the internet now towards journalists. And they say, we're going to quit and all this stuff. Michael Malice reacting, the journalist class is breaking, right? And that might be the case. They might be breaking. And we saw a lot of this happening yesterday. So the Twitter Files 6 came out, but the whole world was still catching up with what Elon did to deplatform a couple of journalists. He ran one of his typical polls. They're all back already, so he let them out of their purgatory. So Keith Olbermann is back, and Aaron Rupar is back, or coming back in a day, or something like that. Anyway, Immediately what we saw was journalists, of course, not being able to compute what happened, and a new round of attacks went in on Elon Musk. So first of all, Michael Malice goes on journalists. He does the old quotes now that Elon Musk has popularized. Journalists, right? Journalists. Journalists were used to being able to violate the rules without repercussions and have people who violated no rules banned for mocking them. Learn to code. Remember when learn to code got banned? They got it banned, right? We saw in these files, they got learn to code banned. They are now freaking out because they are being held accountable for their actions the same as other people. And then Michael Malice goes on, because they are virtually never held accountable for anything, including advocating for war. Right, and we're going to get to that today. Sticks, Hex, and Hammer came up with the new list of attack vectors on Elon. They're great, right? Elon is being arbitrary in his terms of service, right? So that's one of the ones. He's being arbitrary in his terms of service. Here's another one. See, the right wing hates free speech. These are all from Sticks, Hex, and Hammer. They're great. Conservatives weren't targeted. Only Nazis and extremists were targeted. The free press is sanctified and holy. How dare Twitter ban journalists? The free C-Sticks, you're still a shill and not really pro-free speech, because he was for these guys getting criticized. And lastly, the First Amendment only applies to the government. Now, on this show that we have covered this story from the start consistently, and our worldview has remained appropriate and accurate enough to continue to be the way to analyze this. I continue to see most of the Twitter staff as being poisoned by narrative, just like January 6th protesters were poisoned by what they saw. They completely believed in what they saw. Intent is everything in this case. The real story with the Twitter files was the infiltration of the FBI and the CIA and other national security elements. And Twitter File 6 makes that explicit. We now see for a fact that Twitter was a subsidiary of the FBI in all, when we actually think in terms of subordination and how processes were implemented. So forget about the corporate structure for a second. Just think about what processes were in place between the FBI and Twitter and how it all worked. In a certain way, you can actually see clearly that Twitter isn't guilty in this case, because they just gave up all authority and control to these national security elements because they trusted them 100%. They never doubted them and did what a lot of people would have done just a few years ago. I think just a few years ago, it would have been totally normal to organize your world the way Twitter staff did. It turned out that it was completely wrong. Like we don't even know how bad things really are, and we're starting to find out, and we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about JFK and all the information we're finding out lately and how deep this thing might go, and how quickly everything is changing right before our eyes. So what we found out yesterday, the big takeaways from Twitter Files 6 were, and this went to Matt Taibbi again. So that's Taibbi with 3, Barry Weiss with 2, and Michael Schellenberger with 1. Remember, on this show, these are regular sources for us, right? So Elon Musk picked the same sources we pick for our show. So that was helpful. Thank you, Elon. You made my life easy. These are people I check anyway. So Matt Taibbi's big takeaway was, instead of chasing child sex predators or terrorists, the FBI has agents, lots of them, analyzing and mass flagging social media posts. Not as part of any criminal investigation, but as a permanent end in itself surveillance operation. People should not be okay with this. He then underlines that most of this stuff actually comes from the Russia collusion hoax that was perpetrated on Trump in 2016. Here's what he says about that. The ubiquity of the 2016 Russian interference story as stated pretext for building out the censorship machine can't be overstated. It's analogous to how 9/11 inspired the expansion of the security state. So right here, this is a note: Russian malign influence, use of permissive social media platforms, and that's where they built some of these. That's where they built some of this infrastructure and these processes. And indeed, that's what it turns out to look like. The FBI had 80 agents colluding with Twitter to censor Americans. Everyone wondering what it's like at Facebook, right? It's 10 times bigger than Twitter. People wondering what it's like at Google, 25 times bigger than Twitter. Right? We have the same stories that people regularly mention on YouTube and other places. When you talk about certain things, you can see the throttling in your account, and things can go to zero really quickly when it comes to viewers, subscribers when you use certain words in your titles. And many people have complained about this. People who have been on YouTube for a long time have complained about this. So that's the big takeaway from Twitter File 6, is that now it's really clear, without beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the main story here are the processes and subordination of big tech to the federal government, and all the narratives that exposes and starts bringing up. And that's really, the frame that I'm going to use to interpret what's going on and to predict what can happen after this. So I talked about narrative poisoning on the part of the Twitter folks, narrative poisoning on the part of the January 6th folks, people who are just confused, fed psyops, and then move about and do crazy stuff. But of course, we see the world in narratives, and seeing the world in a narrative is an important way to make sense of all this crazy information, especially in terms of economics, right? Having a narrative of where we are in the economy is what the Fed chair is always trying to do. And he's trying to string together a logical story that people can repeat and believe. And as we say often, the difference between Bitcoin and the dollar is that Bitcoin informs and helps us populate a vision of the future that's much more accurate and much easier to conjure than anything you try to imagine with the USD, because the USD has all of these entropic realities about it. It's rotten here and it's rotten there and it's useless here and it's useless there. So when you start trying to imagine what a future could look like on the US dollar, it's not that easy if you know how all the parts work. And the fourth turning narrative that I regularly use in order to understand what's happened and where we're headed seems to fit really well with the revelations of the past couple of days. In the fourth turning narrative, right, these are 80-year history blocks that we should see American history, and it's explicit American history in the book. Other countries, they just assume, are calibrated differently. The book was written in the 1990s, and they see the world in terms of these 80-year history blocks. And these 80-year history blocks really represent 4 generations, each generation being about 20 years, roughly the age required to produce children and start the new generation. So he sees the world in terms of seasons. Really, it's a seasonal thing. And these seasons repeat themselves in 80-year blocks through time. So if you look at American history now, 80 years ago, it's World War II. 80 years before that, it's the American Civil War. 80 years before that, it's the US Revolutionary War. 80 years before that, you start getting into Anglo-American history, but the trend continues through England and the 80-year blocks. What happens in these 80-year blocks is you start off with a golden era, so that's the 1950s in our case. Then there's an awakening, which is everything that happened in the 60s and 70s. Then there's an unraveling, which is the third period, where the things we woke up to in the second era begin to manifest themselves in reality. And then finally, the fourth era is collapse and chaos. So the way the fourth turning dates have been aligned generally by people who follow this kind of stuff is that 1963, 1964, the assassination of JFK ends the golden era and begins the second era of the awakening. And the fourth era, the crisis era, begins in the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So in between, you have the full second era and the full third era. But I'm going to focus right now on the beginning of the second era and the beginning of the fourth era, because they're related. The unraveling. Yeah, Steve says the unraveling. Yeah, the clown world is the unraveling, right? It is the unraveling. So what's going on with all of this stuff? JFK's murder. Well, we know that it, according to lots of folks, springs forth the second era of our 80-year history block. And the second era, when it begins, is the beginning of a lot of the troubles that we're starting to uncover with the Twitter files that a lot of us have known about and a lot of us have thought about. It just so happens that Tucker Carlson had a fella and covered this on his show 2 nights ago. And what did he cover? Well, he covered a fella named a fellow who used to work for the CIA, right? So he used to work for the CIA. And he talks about how this could have happened. How did the JFK thing work out? Because there's a series of files that were supposed to become free in 2017, but Trump kept them secret, and they're supposed to come free right around now. And again, Biden has kept them secret. So what Tucker did is went and spoke to someone who has seen those files that have been kept from us. and said, well, what's going on here? Right? What's in them, right? So first of all, Tucker charts the use of this word conspiracy theory, right? That's part of the story. So the term conspiracy theory did not exist as a phrase in everyday American conversation before 1964. So remember, the awakening period in the fourth turning frame begins in 1964, the moment this word conspiracy theory is created. It's not a coincidence. So from there on, in 1964, the year the Warren Commission issued its report. So the Warren Commission was the commission that looked into the assassination of JFK. The New York Times published 5 stories in which conspiracy theory appeared. So it had never appeared in the New York Times before that. In 1964, it's in 5 times, right? And remember what we've talked about the New York Times on this show, right? We've talked about it a lot, and it's in a lot of evidence lately about SBF and other things. So the source then told Tucker Carlson how the CIA involved, and they said this was their quote: "The answer is yes. Was the CIA involved in the assassination of JFK?" This person used to work for the CIA says the answer is yes. "I believe they were involved. It's a whole different country from what we thought it was. It's all fake." And they mention this Lewis West character. So Lewis West was the psychiatrist who goes to interview Jack Ruby. If you don't know who Jack Ruby is the fella who assassinated Lee Harvey Oswald, who the Warren Commission said was the lone gunman who killed JFK. So both of them were killed by lone gunmen, right? So Jack Ruby in hospital was visited by a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist's name was Lewis West. And we know now that Lewis West was a CIA psychiatrist and part of the MK Ultra program. And he was the person who went in and met Jack Ruby, and they immediately Kanye'd him. They medicated him, and that was the end. We never heard from that person ever again. Totally medicated, said completely out of his mind, right? So this source ends up confirming, yes, I believe the CIA was involved in the Kennedy assassination. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. this morning, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being someone who rose to prominence again with the COVID discussions. I think he's married to Sheryl Crow or something like that. Morning, Justin. Morning, Justin. We're deep into JFK stuff here, so I'll let you catch up. So, but you haven't missed the good stuff yet, Justin. Don't worry, you haven't missed the good stuff. So, so Robert F. Kennedy, who rose to prominence again recently with the COVID discussions, he tweeted this morning, and so that's, if you remember, JFK's brother was killed by Sirhan a little while later when he was running for the presidency in '68. So 4 years, 1 election cycle later, he was going for it, and then he was killed as well. So this is his son. "The most courageous newscast in 60 years, he says. The CIA's murder of my uncle was a successful coup d'etat from which our democracy has never recovered." So that's Robert F. Kennedy Jr. speaking. Did you guys know who has probably the most accurate theory on the assassination of JFK? It's Roger Stone. It's Roger Stone. Roger Stone, if you know who Roger Stone is, Roger Stone was the guy they arrested for the Mueller report stuff. If you remember, they went in with the FBI and they even tipped the cameras, so CNN covered it live, right? CNN covered it live. This raid of Roger Stone's house. Roger Stone was the only person who had to go to jail for the Mueller stuff, and it was over, I think, I don't even remember the details. It was absolutely nothing, right? Absolutely nothing. Something about Assange or whatever. Roger Stone, I knew about before because, and this is just, everyone knows the world that I've come from who watches the show. I worked in the Senate of Canada for years. I worked for the previous Prime Minister in Canada, and knew a lot of these senators and all these kinds of folks. That's how I got involved in Bitcoin, because I did the Bitcoin study in the Canadian Senate in 2013. All this to say, I knew this person, I knew that person, blah, 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 blah. I did know a senator from Canada who's a great friend of mine to this day, who has helped me with Bitcoin stuff in Parliament, in government, and I continue to be close with. He also was a Catholic and who was a kid when Kennedy was became president. So he's from the East Coast of Canada, so Boston, East Coast. It's a big deal, right? It's a familial connection. That part of Canada is very much New England. So it was like one of his own who made it. And this fella had his theories and introduced me to the Roger Stone theory about what happened. So Roger Stone's theory is this, that LBJ, right, the vice president under JFK, already, just put yourself in understanding why he was vice president. Vice president, if you're a non-American and don't know this, it's one of the weakest positions in the entire infrastructure. It doesn't do much and has a bad reputation, let's say, as being powerless. Whatever power you have is at the discretion of the president, who carves out files for you. And that's about all you get. Otherwise, you're the tiebreaker in the Senate, so you don't really do anything in the Senate, because the vice president sits as the speaker or the president of the Senate, so the person in charge of protocol in the Senate. They only get one vote whenever it's 50-50. They break the tie. So that's it. Other than that, they're not needed to vote. They're presiding over the Senate is a ceremonial thing. It's quite useless. They're not really needed. And as I said, whatever they get as a job comes from the discretion of the president. So there was a million reasons why the Kennedys had to put LBJ on the ticket. Truthfully, LBJ had been, Lyndon B. Johnson, had been in charge of the Senate. His biography is called Master of the Senate. And he, for years, had accumulated power within Congress and the Senate, and was generally regarded as the most powerful legislator of that era in America, and had a lot of factions. He's from Texas, right? So he's from Texas, Texas Democrat, and he was on the ticket. Now, a lot of people wondered why he even went for vice president in the first place. Well, the truth is, his life was ending in the Senate. There was investigations on his corruption, and his ability to handle those things was finished. So he came up with a plan to become vice president and get away from the trouble. And it turned out the Kennedys despised him as they got to know him and found out his true motivations. There was a political thing. They're from the North, he's from the South. That's why he was chosen, right? So it turned out that so Stone has a book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. And if you don't know this about Roger Stone, is he has a full face of Nixon tattooed on his back. He's one of the biggest Nixon crazy fans you'll ever know. So Nixon helped him understand this. Nixon said, Nixon is the one who told him that it was LBJ. So Nixon believed this, right? So he says, Nixon said, the damn thing is, I knew this Jack Ruby, so Ruby being involved. Someone brought him to me in 1947 and said, this is one of Johnson's boys, and that LBJ wanted us to hire him as an informant to a committee, and they did. So Nixon immediately recognized that LBJ was using one of his operatives to do cleanup work on the murder of John F. Kennedy. Nixon would also say to me that both Johnson and I wanted to be president, but the only difference was I wouldn't kill for it. At other times, when I pressed the old man hard on who really killed JFK, Nixon would just shiver and say, Texas. So the reason for it was that Lyndon Johnson was on the verge of political execution at the hands of the Kennedys, who hated him, right? And they were, because he used blackmail and intimidation and other things to get onto the ticket in 1960. So all insiders in DC knew that the Kennedys and LBJ were enemies. Robert Kennedy was within days of destroying LBJ. And this is what the senator in Canada had explained to me. Days of destroying LBJ with a 2-track program. One was an RFK-fed Life magazine expose on LBJ's epic corruption and his ties to Bobby Baker's scandals. The other was a Senate Rules Committee investigation, also fed by Robert Kennedy, into LBJ's corruption and kickbacks. Stone said he was desperate, and that would be the end of him. He was going to jail. Forget about the ticket, right? I think you mean Oliver Stone. No, James, I don't. I mean Roger Stone. I don't mean Oliver Stone. No. I mean Roger Stone, the Trump associate who went to jail for the Mueller report. He's the one who wrote the book. Years before any of this trouble, this is what he was known for. He's known as a super eccentric guy who went around DC peddling the story that national security operatives through the Democrat Party had taken over the country during the LBJ times. So his worldview in politics is based on what happened in that era, in the time of the awakening, in the time of the murder of LBJ, of JFK by LBJ. So the story then is that LBJ took power and basically rewrote history from then on, and it had to be done. Not only that, what I'm explaining is he took power, but let those influences which helped him destroy the president, right? The influences that helped him destroy the president, like the CIA, ended up gaining immensely because of this. They gained immensely because of this. They began the Vietnam War right away, right? The first thing LBJ does when he takes power is the Gulf of Tonkin false flag. That's basically day one, right? So immediately they get themselves revving up the war machine. And from then on, everything goes into narrative control. That's where the statement begins, conspiracy theory, right? As Tucker just exposed on the show. So from there, we find ourselves now in this time of great awakening again, right? We're getting all these revelations about how deep the corruption actually goes, how much narrative control is actually out there. When we look at the story for Hunter Biden, right now, I don't know if you guys know this, but Garrett Ziegler, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Garrett Ziegler, another associate of Trump, actually found a way to index the entire Hunter Biden laptop contents. So you can actually go through by searchable items and see what's going on. And if you spend just 5 minutes with it, what you end up realizing, now I haven't heard the other side of the story, right? But if you spend 5 minutes with this indexing tool, what you understand quickly is the Bidens are a crime family, a major crime family, and have been for a long time. And that entity of Democrat crime collusion with national security operations actually date back to the LBJ moments, exactly when the Democrat Party infiltrated. Now, I would say uniparty because there are elements in either entity, but for sure, there's no way to deny that. But that's where the story takes root. It takes root then. And now we see that the Biden family, using the same tools that were deployed to stop the JFK discussion, story, and all of that in 1964, were used again in the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. So the narratives are pulling together now. It's the same story. It's the same story. And when you peel it back, you start to understand that this story has been going on for a long time. Again, Twitter Files 6 makes it clear and explicit. We even understand the procedures now of how the national security and intelligence apparatus co-ops institutions and manages messaging and narrative. And it's been going on for a long time. Again, we found out through Matt Taibbi's latest release that the whole Mueller investigation was the pretense. Like he said, just like 9/11 was a pretense, that was the pretense to erect the systems that allowed for the suppression of the Hunter Biden laptop case in the first place. So we're in this world now of narrative control, but the control of the narrative has been lost, and it's just twisting out in the wind now. And my whole idea of where Bitcoin, so yeah, it's called Marco Polo is the service with Garrett Ziegler that allows you to do this. So my whole theory now is that as we move through the Hunter Biden story, it's actually going to push right back to the JFK story. And we're going to find out that this has been a generational problem, that national security infrastructure has been influencing domestic policy, domestic narrative control for that whole period. And what that's going to do is it's going to frame the entire history of our era. Now, what it looks like is people who were alive back then understood what was going on, just the way we might understand what's going on today, right? We might understand what's going on today, but they lost the fight, right? They lost the fight and weren't able to craft the narrative because these institutions won the fight and were able to create this story where it's Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby, wash your hands and America is still clean, right? The reputational disease isn't there. But did you guys know, I don't know if any of you saw this, and I'll read some of the lyrics right now. So I'm a massive, I'm not a big music fan, by the way. I think music can be, it's a very hypnotic and powerful force, so I rarely listen to it. When I do, I try to make sure it's the right type of music. So I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. And if any of you paid attention during the first during the first 2 weeks, right? The first 2 weeks of the COVID lockdown, flatten the curve 2 weeks, when stress was at its max. If any of you remember this, Bob Dylan released a song at that moment when everyone was locked down, and it rocketed up the charts. And it was called A Murder Most Foul. And it was about the JFK murder. And listen to what he says. "'Twas a dark day in Dallas, November 63, a day that will live on in infamy. President Kennedy was a riding high, good day to be living and a good day to die. Being led to the slaughter like a sacrificial lamb, he said, 'Wait a minute, boys, you know who I am?' 'Of course we do, we know who you are.' Then they blew off his head while he was still in the car. Shot down like a dog in broad daylight. Was a matter of timing, and the timing was right. You got unpaid debts, we've come to collect. We're going to kill you with hatred, without any respect." And they go on, right? They blew out the brains of the king. Thousands were watching. No one saw a thing. It happened so quickly, so quick by surprise, right there in front of everyone's eyes. Greatest magic trick ever under the sun. Perfectly executed, skillfully done. And he goes on to describe the conditions that they were in, right? And here's what I think sticks out, right? "Don't ask what your country can do for you. Cash on the barrelhead, money to burn. Dealey Plaza, make a left turn. I'm going down to the crossroads, gonna flag a ride. The place where hope and faith and charity died. Shoot him while he runs, boys, shoot him while you can. See if you can shoot the invisible man." So they go on, and in the end, the conclusion is this. They killed him once, and they killed him twice. Killed him like a human sacrifice. The day that they killed him, someone said to me, "Son, the age of the Antichrist has only just begun. Air Force One coming in through the gate. Johnson sworn in at 2:38. Let me know when you decide to throw in the towel. It is what it is, and it's a murder most foul." There it is, guys. I mean, even Bob Dylan knew what was going on, right? He knew what was going on. People know. And the truth has been suppressed through narrative control since 1964. The truth about how it operates, how it works, has been kept since 1964, and you haven't been able to talk about it. Now, what happens with this narrative control, now that we know the Hunter Biden laptop is real, are we going to get answers? Well, I think if the old world was there, no, right? No. But what we understand, what I understand anyway, is this was all done because the World War II machine was about to be shut off, right? President Eisenhower wanted it. Kennedy got elected breaking those promises. People don't understand that Kennedy was beholden to the war machine as he got elected because he invented the concept of the missile gap. He invented it. Now, he kind of had to invent the concept of the missile gap because it was related to the book that made him famous, While America Slept. The book While America Slept was published in World War II by his dad, by Kennedy's dad, but it made him a celebrity. It was his thesis at Harvard or whatever. That's what led to him being a senator. That publication ended up making him famous. And the narrative, he was the guy who didn't want you to sleep, kind of, right? Like, I'm the guy who's active and I know what's going on. So when he took the narrative from a convenient narrative for missile creators, he sold the story Missile Gap, and that's what got him elected. Because Nixon was running on disarmament, because that's what Eisenhower had given him. Nixon was Eisenhower's VP, right? So Nixon was Eisenhower's VP, and then in 60 he was running against Kennedy. There was some stealing of the election in Chicago, right? None of it. There's no good guys here, right? There's no good guys. There was some stealing of the election in Chicago, as I understand. Kennedy ends up realizing what he's got on his hands when the Bay of Pigs falls, and he realizes that he's not really in control. He's got problems. The things that Eisenhower warned him about were real, and Eisenhower warned about the industrial war machine, and you can't just shut it down. And Kennedy was threatening to shut it down, not because of any principle necessarily. It just didn't fit his worldview. Now, LBJ has an opportunity. He's got his own troubles, so there's a way for the hand and glove to work together. And what they do then is they actually don't shut the World War II machine off. I think of the machine that won World War II as the bureaucracy, the collusion between the consumption economy, the industrial war machine manufacturers, and policymakers. And once those three pieces move, especially with media and force, I mean, that's the Nazi model, right? That's the Nazi model. And then other countries learned the Nazi model because it worked, and it worked very powerfully. They copied it, and they kept it running. And they kept the battleships running, they kept the aircraft carriers running, they kept the missile tests going, they kept the missile gap argument in place. All of it benefited the commercial relationships and the orchestration between those entities, the war machine, commercial interests with the media, and the government. It allowed them to operate in the same coordination that had won World War II. It was a good organization at the start, right? It was effective. They didn't shut it down. They didn't shut it down. And Americans lost. Everything that allowed them to win World War II was used on them. Just like the PSYOP stuff that we all know about American influence in elections in Guatemala and these other places have been turned on the American population now. The same tactics being used on them. Psychological warfare, economic warfare, all of these things live. And when we peel back now the narrative around the Hunter Biden laptop, we're going to see it actually goes into this orchestration of money. And the only way any of this could have gone on for so long without anyone understanding it is because of the fractional reserve system. That's it. If there's no fractional reserve system, fat, pink-haired people are not telling us how to be healthy, and warmongers are not telling us how to get peace. It's not happening. This is where the race baiting begins in America. What was LBJ? He's one of the biggest race baiters you've ever seen. There's no one worse. He was a full racist who flipped for public persona and optics in the 1960s to be an emancipator and a civil rights stalwart. All of the Democrat reputation around civil rights stuff comes from the wedge issue that he identified in the 1960s. He helped flip the political orientation of the United States at that time, because he picked up on that great society thing, and they would spend all kinds of public money. That's where welfare begins. That's where public broadcasting begins. That's where the Planned Parenthood stuff comes from, all from that era. Every single thing that led to division in America began under his watch. And we're going to find out through the Hunter Biden stuff, we're going to find out this narrative goes back to there. Now, the reason it's great for Bitcoin is because the narrative in the end is a follow the money situation. And we're going to find out that the corruption of money from that moment on, the corruption of money from the war machine and from media is going to become more clear. And the reason we're going to understand it this time is because these narratives, the JFK thing, is much easier to understand than, oh, a bank took money from you and you don't know where it is and that person has it and they made bombs, but you're safe and we don't know and who knows. That's not going to work anymore. It's not going to work. The Hunter Biden story will narratively combine with the JFK story as we go forward, and we're going to find out. And the reason why they lost last time is because they could hide the facts through hiding the money. It won't be possible anymore. It's going to stop. And we're going to find out all the stuff we need to know. We're going to find out. Right? All right. Joe says, I was 4 years old. Yeah. We have a tough time ahead, but what a time to be alive. I don't think it's going to be that tough. These people are too stupid, right? Tucker had Max Kaiser on recently too. It was amazing. Yeah, Tucker is really, I think he's going to become a full Bitcoiner soon. I do. Fat people telling us how to eat. Yeah. Bud says, think the big guy will get impeached. No, I think they're going to go down with the ship. I think if you take the fourth turning model, if you take the fourth turning prediction model, in times of crisis, when you do the fourth turning and you wake up in the new golden age, the party holding the bag of responsibility is destroyed. They'll be punished for life. I think it's the end of them, but they've got 2 years of suffering before them. Before it's confirmed dead. I think the whole thing might last until the 2028 presidential election, but it feels like we're going to get relief. It's already there. I mean, we're already on to me, I think we're on the back nine already. I think that this crash in Bitcoin and simultaneous Musk buying Twitter is the is the So Justin says, if you keep digging the JFK story, you'll find the Bush family. You will, yeah, you will find JFK Sr. at the scene. And this senator believes that as well. The one who told me what I know about the LBJ story. He definitely said that the Uniparty was created right there. And this is something that I think people will never, people who really hate Trump and have Trump derangement syndrome, something they'll never understand. What people like me thought of Trump at the start. Because when the Uniparty became obvious to me after Obama's second win, when it was clear that there was no hope of reform within the Republican Party and through the normal political channels, watching Trump deconstruct the old GOP and break the Uniparty hold on the Republicans is something that people will love him for forever. Candidate Trump, before he's even president, when he's not even yet nominee of the Republican Party, was one of the greatest shows you'll ever see in the history of the world. I think it'll be recognized in history as one of the biggest reality jarring series of talk, series of whatever we'll ever see. I mean, it was so off the cuff, so irreverent, so crazy that it shattered all the stuff. I don't think we're here unless he does that. I don't think unless he pounded Jeb Bush the way he did, low energy Jeb Bush, one of the greatest knockout punches in the history of debates, right? When he's like, you're getting further away from me, like this stuff was so rude and crass, and we'd never seen it, and we knew all the rules were changing. And the minute I saw that, like I said, the minute I heard the Mexican rapist speech, I said, this is new and could be really good. It just scrambled brains. And look, everyone now sees, right? I was wrong when I said about Trump even 2 days ago, oh, he's lost his touch with the NFT thing. Ridiculous, I said. I tweeted it. Ridiculous, right? No. Like, in the end, you're almost always going to be wrong when you judge this guy's persuasion and narrative control. In the end, what did he do? He got a bunch of people to cover him for being stupid, and then in the end, it's one of the greatest fundraising tactics ever demonstrated. But not even that, he was able to get his bill of freedom of speech stuff passed, or at least passed in conversation. I think had he just come out with that, even I was like already reluctant to say, well, he's kind of lost it. I probably would have just gone with, I don't know, like other people are saying this, right? But the way he did it, to go and get criticism and then turn around right away and come up with what he came up with, shows he hasn't lost it. I mean, I thought he did. Really, I did. I believed it. And when I saw him do that, it was clear. So yeah, those debates were amazing. Those were the best. Those were so much fun when he was super nuts. But yeah, so the Bush family, I think, gets caught up in this too. I think they get, because you see them getting protected by the cathedral as it is, right? You see them getting, oh, look at how nice George Bush Jr. is now. He's an elder statesman. Imagine treating that guy like an elder statesman. Imagine. So I think, look, the reason why we're going to be peeling narrative back to that time, right to the JFK assassination, is because of people like the Bushes, so that we knew not to trust them for years. They've been around all kinds of fishy stuff. I know Reagan hated the little Bush, hated him, right? Why? Well, you tell me, right? But because this is such an affront, here's what it does for Bitcoin. This is what's so great, right? It's what I've said from the start. American patriotism is a blind spot. It's a blind spot. And it allows America to abuse its people in a way that is unique in the world. And part of that actually allowed the dollar to persist in its position because people were so patriotic for America that they can't admit its mistakes, or they go too far in admitting its mistakes, or some miscalibrated version, some controlled opposition version of what should really happen. Now, I've always said that the Chinese had a major advantage because they have a culture, and even if it's been abused and there's been brainwashing through the CCP, they know things like the dollar aren't really like, or the yuan aren't really like the things you're proud of in a culture, right? They know that. Their culture is old enough to know that the stupid piece of paper with some old people's faces on it is not really anything that you need to defend in terms of patriotism. And now that this will be exposed, that American patriotism will be properly segregated from its faults, and American culture will be properly identified and pulled out, I think we're going to have a much greater focus on non-American in spirit things, and there's nothing less American in spirit than the Federal Reserve. And so the conversation, because it's going to go to JFK, is going to open up so deep that we're going to have an opportunity psychologically for Bitcoin to replace the dollar, psychologically, right? Because we're going to throw away everything. This is a total flip of reality when people understand what happened with JFK and what's happening now. That the Bidens are probably a very serious crime family, like a real crime family. And they couldn't have these conversations before because it was too easy to control the narrative. It's less easy now, and because we have an alternative money, it isn't just going to be about money on the barrelhead and corruption. It's a totally different game, right? Trump said he was going to, yeah, we talked about that, Justin. Yeah, no, we talked about that, son of a bitch. Because that's why this is even happening in the first place. That's why this is even happening in the first place, Justin. It's because Tucker Carlson did a show 2 days ago about the Biden administration locking them up again, and even talking about Pompeo being the one who did it during Trump's thing, and said they invited Mike Pompeo on the show 2 nights ago, and he said no. So he was going for the results here for sure. And I'm not. I'm absolutely. Look, Trump didn't forget about JFK. Trump, if he was sincere, and this is why I always pick the last day of his presidency to mark my own personal complete separation from supporting him, and still not supporting him, and probably never will because of the last day. If he was so sincere about all of his troubles with these same people, with the national security apparatus, with the CIA and the FBI, all he needed to do was let Assange and Snowden out, and they would have made his case for him. That's all he needed to do. That's it. He needed to do one thing, and he didn't do it. So you can tell me whatever, they put pressure, the family, I don't care. I don't give a fuck. Everyone who supported him for those years did it because we thought he was going to drain the swamp and fight these motherfuckers to the last of his dying breath. We hoped, and he didn't do it. So we do need someone who will go to the last dying breath. He's just not extreme enough, right? He's not extreme. That's why when he did, if you guys remember, he started selling dark MAGA. Remember dark MAGA? I would be down with dark if he would go on the dark MAGA thing. And his whole dark MAGA philosophy was, I wasn't mean enough when I was president. I was too nice, right? Well, that would be fun. Yeah, Trump should have freed them. That's the biggest mistake. Look, I'm one of his most gentle followers, and will excuse or explain almost anything he does. It's a great personal cost, right? Losing friends, people yelling at me, anger. You could barely use social media because my thoughts were just not compatible, right? And he lost me on that day, right? Totally. I still can't understand it. And I've never heard a reason, a good one, all bullshit, all typical bullshit. So he made a big mistake there, and I would only support him if he was the only person going and there was literally nothing else you could do in order to get results. But other than that, but we like Fetterman on this show. We want Fetterman. Fetterman would put the truth out. He'd fight against all these people. All right, team. I got to. Okay, yeah. I'm traveling to Toronto today. Should be okay for tomorrow morning's show, but you never know. You never know. Getting there, who knows if the internet is good? Whatever. We'll see. So hopefully we'll be able to have our show tomorrow. If I don't, I will tweet it out that I'm not, but it should be okay. But we'll be live from Toronto next week, and then we move the studio down south for winter. We'll be out of here. Peace.